Okay, I think that's everyone. All right, thanks for being here, everybody.
Bradley, question.
Yes, Fenton?
Will there be refreshments?
Refreshments?
Yes, like snacks and drinks. Ooh, maybe punch. I've just discovered what punch is, and I rather like it.
Okay, so just to be clear, Fenton, you're asking me if there will be refreshments during an actual battle?
Yes, precisely.
No, there won't be.
Oh, drat. I knew I should have eaten beforehand.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, I'll let our fearless general here take it away. Go ahead, Sir Alistair.
Thank you, my friend. Greetings, all. Today, we will be participating in a mock battle set in the realm of Devine. While we wait for the Order of the Pawn to resume in March, we must continue our training.
This is great! I get to do cardio and kill things!
Always the optimist, Arnold.
You will be joined in battle by the other members of the Order as well.
That's right! I need to get my mind off the pole from Chapter 9. I'm currently tied with Sir Alistair.
Thank you for reminding me of that, Jameson. I had just forgotten.
Excuse me.
Yes, Schmeagol?
Will there be refreshments?
You too? I'm sorry, but it is a fat question. Why does everyone keep asking that? What battles have you been to that have refreshments?
Well, I once went to a debate that had snacks.
That's not a battle.
Hey, it's a battle of words.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, let's get this battle started.
Excuse me, Bradley. Where are you going?
Oh, me? I've got to go record the podcast, so I won't be participating, but you all have fun!
Oh, how convenient.
What is a podcast?
Oh, it's a weekly show that I do, Sir Alistair. It's called Saved as Draft.
What a peculiar name.
Give it time. It'll grow on you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 52 of the Saved as Draft podcast. 2026 continues to be quite the interesting year so far. From a community perspective, though, things couldn't be better. This week, I've got a packed episode for you, as always. Also, next week, I will be on a business trip, so instead of skipping the podcast like some sort of heretic, I'll be doing a shorter episode featuring an interview with, well, me. You can submit questions up until this Sunday, January 18th, by checking out the link to my subscriber chat in the show notes, or submitting your questions here in the episode's comments. Given the last-minute trip, that also means this weekend's power-up prompt will actually last 2 weeks instead of 1, given that I won't be able to check out the entries until the episode after I'm back. More on that in the post tomorrow. Okay, wrenches in gears aside, let's talk about this week's Community Spotlight before we get into the episode. This week I'm featuring a friendly ghost that many of you may know. I'm of course referring to the wonderful Asteria Geisterbloom. Asteria's birthday was recently, and 2 members of the community put together some amazing posts highlighting how her work has impacted people everywhere and how her efforts in the community have made her a shining light that we all love to read and follow. Shout out to Happy Nielsen and KJ Harlow for those awesome posts. I'll link both in the show notes. I myself also did one of my famous birthday speeches on Substack, which I'll read here as well. So when it comes to Asteria, there are certain people on Substack who I have looked up to from the very beginning. People who embody the community I'm trying to build and the writer and person that I aspire to be every day. People who not only create works of art, but go out of their way to share and support others. And of course, Asteria is one of those people. The posts by Happy Nielsen and KJ Harlow are packed with examples of why this statement is true. So many people have felt seen and moved by Asteria's work, myself included. And many others have been featured by her or participated in her writing challenge last year. People as special as Asteria are rare, and I'm really proud to call her my friend. So, once more, let's raise all of our virtual glasses for this slightly belated birthday wish to the greatest literal ghost wink writer this side of the great beyond. Happy birthday, Asteria. I hope it was great. And thank you again to Asteria for all that she does and for being an amazing part of this community. Okay, now, this week's episode, we're going to start with our weekly shoutouts, then we'll dive into the wandering prompt stories from last week. Yes, plural. There were 2, so we'll have our grand prize winner and the runner-up. After that, we have a huge list of power-up prompt stories to talk about from this past week's Gothic horror prompt. It's got to be a new record. I haven't done the research to confirm, but it is a lot of stories. After that, we'll look into this week's indie release radar, powered by BookStack, of course, and participate in some writing discussion before we head into this week's featured guest interview. This week, I'm sitting down with Tom Schechter, who is a history enthusiast and author of the Shieldbreaker Saga. It's an amazing interview, as always, so look forward to that later in the episode. And that's it for housekeeping this week. We'll get right into our weekly shoutouts after a quick word from this week's sponsor. Today's episode of the Saved as Draft podcast is brought to you by Cookmate. Hey, Flexa,
Yes?
give me a recipe for chocolate chip cookies.
Sure thing. Here's a post from the Cooking Mama blog about chocolate chip cookies.
Perfect.
Chapter 1.
Wait, there's chapters?
When I think about chocolate chip cookie recipes, my mind goes back to when I was just a little girl.
Oh, brother. Flexa, I don't need their whole life story. From the brilliant minds that brought you the Haiku Highway, buddy, comes a new way to enjoy your cooking time. Okay, let's try this again. Hi, Cookmate.
Ready to cook now. Cooking is a form of art. Our journey begins.
Ooh, I like that. Okay, let's try this again. Can I get a recipe for chocolate chip cookies?
Begin with flour. White powder of plants. Measure carefully.
Ooh, so relaxing. I love this. Okay, how much flour do I need? Don't worry about telling me in haiku form.
Measurement is free. Decide yourself what is best. Get inspired now.
Okay, I appreciate where you're coming from, but baking is an exact science, so if you could just give me the right measurement, that would be great.
Science and haiku. Next, you must obtain butter. Make cookies today.
That's the plan. I just don't know how much flour to use.
Maybe this is wrong. You should make something else now. Perhaps a sandwich.
I don't want a sandwich, I want cookies!
Cookies are constructs. You must first believe in them, then they will be real.
Okay, let me get this straight. You're saying that if I believe cookies are real, that they'll just magically appear?
Low battery.
Oh, for the love of... Turn your kitchen into a philosophical space with the all-new Cookmate. Transform recipes into revelations about yourself and your place in the universe. Order yours today. All right, and we're back. As you can probably tell, the sponsor this week was inspired by all the haikus that have been floating around on Substack. I really enjoy those little mini challenges, though, so please keep tagging me in them. I have a great time. All right, time for this week's shoutouts. Every week, I open a thread on Tuesdays in my subscriber chat where you can drop links to your latest work. I share the links with Mina Howell's Penny Dreadfuls podcast, and we each pick 5 at random to talk about on our show. So, here are the stories I chose from this week's thread. Our first shout out this week is The Notebook of Mariah Bend by Loki Cone. Now, one thing I've mentioned every time I bring up Loki Cone's work on the show is that they always include really amazing author notes at the end of their work. In this case, the notes provide some really amazing context around the story, so I want to talk about that for a moment. The piece here was written for the Myths of Winter Week 6 prompt, which is awesome. The prompt was about what would happen if silence became the only safety left, if speaking out loud would wake something in the winter dark. What Loki Cone created from this is a series of fragmented notes, written like journal entries, but displayed in a style that I've never quite seen. It's part poetry, part prose, but it fully embraces this theme of silence and things we're afraid to say. It's purposefully fragmented, down to the sentences themselves, and it takes on its own style as a result. What I love too is how some of these more, let's say, supernatural elements kind of bleed through, but the heart of the story is human, painfully human. As Loki Cone says, it's about what we owe each other and how that saying the truth out loud can change the weight of what we carry. I got chills reading that. Amazing. Here's an excerpt from the piece itself. Talmadge writes, finally hearing the sound coming from himself. I've been humming. Didn't know. Can't stop it now. Sorry. The others noticed it then for the first time. That thin melody threading through everything. They hadn't heard it before, but now they can't unhear it. Virgil writes below. Debt wants paying. We all owe something. That night the loom runs without power. Clack and shuttle in the dark. Something small moves between the machines. Each of them sees someone they failed. Royce sees Dennis Pope. Talmadge sees Iris in her hospital bed, skin yellow from the poison, eyes asking why he didn't quit the company, why he chose the money over her living. They leave before dawn. Virgil's lips are blue. His insulin ran out yesterday. Whew. Everything I read from Loki Cone is incredible and super emotional. This might be my favorite piece from them yet, though, so I really can't recommend it enough. Our second shout-out this week is The Phantom of Nibelheim, Act 1, by J. Allen Winchester. So, Jaden and I have talked about this series of his a few times, and I was really excited to see the link come up for this week's shoutouts. What we have here is a mashup of Final Fantasy VII and The Phantom of the Opera. Oh yeah, you heard that right. In this story's cover image, Jaden asks, what if the Phantom was the hero? And what if Cloud Strife never entered the Shinra mansion? Now this is how it's done. He's taken two iconic stories and asks some compelling questions about not only how they could fit together, but how they could become something new in the process. This piece also has narration, which I of course highly recommend. And not only does Jaden include narration, but there is singing here as well in the audio. Yeah, it turns out my friend is an insanely talented singer. Like, holy crap. I felt like I was tuning into a musical. The quality is insanely good. And the way the story moves in and out of singing segments is beautiful as well. I would almost say the audio version is practically a requirement to truly appreciate what Jaden has done here. I'm going to grab an excerpt from the narration since I can't sing, but here's what we have as an excerpt from the story. A dark figure ran through the shadows of the sleepy town. Stopping suddenly, he ducked into an alleyway at the sound of voices. He pulled the neck of his cloak closer to his lower face, letting his headband slip down over most of his eyes. Glaring through the smaller field of vision, the tall figure watched two Shinra patrol officers walk past his alley. He fought the urge to growl at the insignia on their uniforms, debating if he should cut them down. Seeing their drunken stagger, laughing at some perverted joke, he concluded that he would let them live for another night. He decided to head home and turned in the direction of his destination. Suddenly, the voice of a cherub touched his sensitive ears. It sounded too beautiful to ignore. He looked toward a nearby window above and found his graceful deity. There, sitting in the sill, was a brown-haired young woman, crying as she sang. His heart skipped a beat at the sight of her. "Lucretia," he whispered into the night. The woman re-entered the room shortly after he caught sight of her, much to his displeasure. "I have to see her. Just one more time." Folks, I'm telling you, you gotta go listen to this right now. You can pause the podcast and come back. I am blown away by the writing and singing from Jaden here in the audio. Incredible. Stunning, stunning work. Our third shout out this week is Chocolate Truffle Surprise by Istvan Markon. This is a poem that will have you asking, is it hot in here? By the end. It's a piece that uses some really nice word choice and flow to paint a vivid picture and crank up that old spice level in the process. I also really like the formatting here. The spacing of the words is intentional in that it creates a sort of breath between certain lines and phrases. It's a really creative element that elevates the entire piece. And again, if you don't mind your poetry a little spicy and sweet, this one is an easy recommendation. Here's a short excerpt because anything longer will give this podcast a whole different rating. Bite me. You know you want to. Slowly, sinfully, dark, rich, melting. Forget your manners. Use your fingers. Trace the swirl. Oh! Is it hot in here? I feel like it's getting hot in here. Let's move on to the next shout out. Our fourth shout out this week is Gone Viral, Send Help by Sarah Tinney. The opening line just above where the story begins in this one is spectacular. It says, "We spend so much time bracing ourselves for failure that we rarely stop to imagine what success might demand of us." What follows is a short microfiction piece for a prompt issued by Storylamp Reviews over on Medium. It's about someone who quits their job to pursue writing, and while imposter syndrome creeps up on them, they do it anyway. Of course, by the end, they soon discover that success brings its own challenges and pressures. I really resonated with this one, especially because I never expected my work here on Substack to take off the way that it has. I feel like Sarah captures that really well here. And of course, I've already been through the stage of freaking out when I realized things were taking off, but this is a powerful reminder that success brings its own unique challenges. Here's an excerpt. He sighed, mashing the backspace key. Why was writing so hard? Trying to be insightful, funny, intelligent, and self-deprecating, all at once. Deep down, the voice whispered, "You can't do this. Quitting your job was a mistake. Go back to sales. Sure, you were bored, but you weren't broke." He exhaled, closed his eyes, breathing deeply. His eyes snapped open, and he started typing, pressing post before he could second-guess himself. The next morning, dinging jolted him awake. He squinted at his phone, then sat bolt upright. Likes, comments, and shares. Oh my. Oh my, indeed. Great work from Sarah this week. I like that one. Our fifth shout-out this week is Poetic Melancholy by Rebecca Watson. This is a poem that examines melancholy in depth, and as is always the case with Rebecca's work, I have to pause between every stanza to just let those emotions echo. Seriously, Rebecca is becoming one of my favorite poets on Substack. This is just amazing work. And I love how the piece personifies melancholy in a meaningful way. It gives it characteristics and quirks, things that make it feel less like something that happens to you and more like a companion that you travel with from time to time. And here's the thing, it's not bad per se, but it's not good either. It sort of defies those descriptions. Here, Rebecca transforms an emotion into something beyond words. She elevates it, examines it, gently sets it back down to go on its way. If you have even a passing interest in poetry, this is a must-read. I'm so serious. Here's an excerpt. Melancholy knows all the words for love after the leaving, after the apology that arrived too late, and learned to sit quietly in the throat. It is not despair. Despair wants an ending. Melancholy prefers ellipses, long walks where nothing happens, songs that end before the chorus resolves. I really hope I wrote a poem this good one day. Stunning work, seriously, from Rebecca. As always, check the show notes for a link. Please give this one a read. It's fantastic. And before we move on, I want to take a quick moment to shout out a 6th post that went live today from my friend, the Verdant Butterfly. So this was a listener's perspective on the Saved as Draft podcast here, complete with original art that I adored. The post itself is a look into every aspect of this podcast and what it means for creatives and the broader community. It's a thoughtful, beautifully written, and incredibly genuine review of the show here that came as a complete surprise to me, but a welcome one indeed. So I'll include a link in the show notes, but please check it out if you're a fan of the show. I think Verdant Butterfly really captured the spirit of what I'm doing here, and it was so humbling to see. And again, the art is spectacular. I love all the art she does, but this piece was just amazing. I won't spoil it. Check the link in the show notes. Check it out. It's such a great post. And again, amazing work from everyone this week. Next up, we'll take a look, runner-up and grand prize winner. Hello and welcome to this week's Wandering Prompt Award Ceremony. Let's start with a look at our runner-up, a piece called The Tendrils of the Cosmic Piper by Malric Wraithmore. The way Malric uses my prompts and pulls them into their worlds is astonishing. I'll talk more on this in the Power Up Prompt Stories segment later with one of their works, but with this piece, they used last week's Wandering Prompt to kick off a dark fairy tale that's immediately steeped in a dreary and uncertain world that pulled me right in. I love how it reads like a folklore fairy tale as well. It has an elegance to the writing that feels like the kind of story that's been polished and shifted and passed down over generations. And of course, we also get an amazing poem at the end that leaves us with a chilling but equally elegant conclusion, almost like a nursery rhyme. The premise here with the fog and of course the piper just blends so beautifully into the world they've created. It's amazing that this came from the Wandering Prompt. Here's an excerpt from the poetry near the end. This is a tale of a piper who enacts a tithe. Hear his spectral testament. The scent on the wind of death enticed. Tear you open like a chrysalis, or your guardians will pay the price. He is neither good nor evil. He is an inevitable upheaval. Amazing, amazing work. Thank you again for that entry into last week's Wandering Prompt. And next up, we will talk about our grand prize winner, the story posted first for last week's Wandering Prompt. Announcers, take it away. And the winning story from last week is My Son the Beast by Mariah K. Porter.
Interesting title. That's how my mother always referred to me.
Were you raised by wolves?
Yeah, actually. It's a long story.
Maybe another time, guys. Let's talk about Mariah's winning story. This one is a fresh take on the Beauty and the Beast, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed how Mariah shifted the perspective here, and how the fairies in the story were a constant source. of suspense. Can they be trusted?
Not at poker, I'll tell you that.
Most fairies are cool, though.
I really enjoyed how Mariah's style here matched the feeling of a fairy tale. The writing is elegant, and it flows beautifully.
I agree, and despite knowing the fairy tale that inspired the piece here, Mariah successfully subverted my expectations again and again as the story went on. A truly fresh take on a classic tale. Here's an extended excerpt. I could not fathom the reason for this curse, and so I was terrified of what else she might do to myself and my son. I could not bring him home with me for fear there would be talk of his identity. Even should I hide him, how would I ever find a maiden to love him as he was? His heart was worthy, but his countenance would surely repulse any maiden who would otherwise be a suitable match. 20 years I'd fought for my kingdom, and I'd rather the war had never ended than my small family go through this. Just as I was despairing to hope, another fairy arrived. I was not eager to trust her. The fairy brought promises, but most were vague. She told me she could protect me from the evil fairy who had cursed my son, and she promised that she could orchestrate the undoing of the curse. I was nearly willing to agree to this when she told me that her plan involved turning all of our servants at the castle to stone. How could I agree to such a thing? To take from them their lives under the assumption that the curse could be broken, just to protect my son's identity and thus prolong the curse's breaking? I did not give her my answer shortly. In the end, I felt there was no better option. Congrats to Mariah again for winning last week's prompt, and next up, we'll dive into this past week's Power Up Prompt stories. Alright, and this past week's Power Up prompt was Gothic Horror. Your setting was the lighthouse, your character was the reluctant guardian, and your conflict was the cost of happiness. We've got nearly 20 entries this week, which I'm pretty positive is a new record. So, let's see what everyone came up with. First this week, we've got The Light Keeper of a Bloody Heart by DBLK Rose of Black Spider Publishing. As always with this author's work, the writing on display here is exceptional in both its beauty and its detail. It quickly establishes the elements of the prompt before delving into the pain our protagonist feels for this endless life he finds himself in. The constant internal conflict here is used wonderfully, and as the story goes on, we catch a glimpse of the outside world as people suddenly show up to try and condemn the island and its structures. This element is really fascinating because it's used to show how the modern world is strange and alien to our protagonist. Ultimately, the story ends with a choice, and it leaves you with a haunting final line. And, I gotta say, one of the best musical pairings I've seen yet. A mashup of Linkin Park and Evanescence, and yes, it's as good as it sounds. Second this week for our Power Up Prompt Stories is For Now by Wendy Russell. Wendy's writing has always really impressed me from a dialogue standpoint, and that's absolutely the case here. In this piece, we get a conversation between our two characters, the lighthouse keeper and his prisoner, in this case, a man named Cassian. The reason why I mention the dialogue here is because Wendy knows how to establish strong connection and chemistry between her characters. Every line feels intentional, and it carries weight. The sheer range of emotions in this piece is very impressive as a result. Over the course of it, their conversation waxes poetic, nostalgic, and even a little romantic. It's really impressive work, and the chemistry on display brought me into their admittedly complex relationship, and given the prompt, complex is putting it lightly. So, shout out to Wendy's musical pairing here as well. She chose Change in the House of Flies by Deftones, and the track's melancholy vibe pairs beautifully with this story. Love it. Next up this week we've got Keeping the Light by Jennifer Jorgensen. And with this piece, I have to call out the first line, which reads, "The fog wrapped the lighthouse like gauze, soft, clinging, suffocating." I mean, come on. What an opener. Not only is it well written, but this opening line establishes atmosphere and intrigue in just a handful of words. It's a great example of how to hook your readers from minute one. And with this story, Jennifer also adds in a new element that I hadn't considered. In this world, our lighthouse keeper and the prisoner are part of a larger governing body called the Council. Shortly into the story here, a vampire from the outside world shows up to relieve the keeper of her duties. As you can imagine, this doesn't go well. But Jennifer explores the concept by having them fight and then leaving the story with an open ending that hints at what may come next. It's the perfect balance between a satisfying story arc and enough of a glimpse of the greater world to leave you pondering what could happen in a follow-up. I'm a huge fan of Jennifer's work, and this story is yet another example of why I will always recommend her stories every time they come across my feed. It's a pitch-perfect entry for this week's prompt. Next, we have The Siren's Lighthouse by Mercedes D. Santiago. Mercedes has been doing the power-up prompts for a few weeks now, and this entry is my favorite one from her yet. It sets up a really interesting premise involving a force field around the lighthouse and an undersea kingdom to which our keeper belongs. As the story goes on, we get a look into the backstory of our protagonist and the prisoner. It does a great job of establishing a connection, which is important because a final twist near the end will be even more heartbreaking once you know the full story. And honestly, I wasn't expecting those final moments, but the way Mercedes built up to them made them feel really effective for me. It's impressive work for this week's prompt, and a fantastic story in its own right. Next up, we have Crescent and Cross by Nicholas Barely. There's a note at the top of here about how this was a post they had to write and rewrite, and how they tried to make it prose, but it became poetry. And honestly, I feel that. But honestly, also, I love seeing poems for these prompts, so I'll never complain, especially when Nicholas's poetry is so good. This piece is amazing for a number of reasons. The rhyme structure in particular really hammers home specific points of each stanza in a way that I found really effective. But another element here is the use of repetition to accomplish something similar. So for example, we have a stanza that reads, "The boats will break on the rocks, I won't care. The men will delve deep in the ground, I won't care. They'll find you locked in your box, I won't care. They'll adore you and make you unbound, I won't care." The repetition of "I won't care" just works so well there. It hammers home the emotion of the moment, and I love doing that in my poetry as well, so it's a great technique that I wanted to call out. And yes, the narrative approach to poetry works really well for me in this case too. It calls to mind Conor Mancuso's style of epic poetry, and that's very good company to be in. So, awesome work from Nicholas this week. Our next power-up prompt story is Emotional Coding in Furnace by Malric Wraithmore, the Liturgist. Right off the bat, I love how Malric used this week's prompt as part of an ongoing series. Apparently they also did it last week, and I just forgot when I was writing this. However, that being said, I love seeing this, and I don't think I've seen anyone else really kind of take a power-up prompt and put it into a series that's already ongoing, or a world that's already existing. I've seen people obviously use the prompts to kickstart a series, but this is something a little different. And so immediately this story establishes a great atmosphere. The tone of the writing is sharp, but also a little jaded. The setting is unique, and the imagery makes me feel like I'm stepping into this really established setting. The piece also shifts from prose to poetry, which reads like song lyrics. The final stretch is the cherry on top of a superb reading experience, and I'm already sold on this whole world. I love that the power-up prompt has played a part in it. Our next story this week is The Altar of Black Rock by Rebecca Watson. So let me preface this by saying that I'm a huge fan of Lovecraftian horror, and this has got to be one of the best examples of the genre that I've ever seen. Special care was taken to tie these themes into the themes of gothic horror here. It's a sort of gothic cosmic horror hybrid, and it's easily one of the best stories I've read since I started doing prompts on Substack, period. It's the combination of eloquent writing, phenomenal word choice, and atmosphere that really shines in this piece. The way it layers in Lovecraftian themes with the raw emotion you expect from gothic horror is nothing short of masterful. All the pieces of the story are exceptional, but when you put them together here, they become more than the sum of their parts. Let me just share a few standout lines real quick. The light that bled from the lamp was a violent, iridescent violet. It was a color that didn't belong to the visible spectrum of man. A hue that felt like it was peeling back the skin of reality. And another line, he saw the ruins of a city whose geometry was wrong, angles that hurt his eyes to track, towers that seemed to grow downward into the abyss, and then the light swept back into the room. And one more, the great deep is cold, Lucas. It's a desert of silence. We find the sparks of your sorrow delicious. They burn so bright. If you keep the light burning, the dream never has to end. You can stay here in the warmth forever. I mean, come on. I don't think I've ever written anything this good when it comes to horror or Lovecraftian horror, which is another reason why this story really blew me away. Rebecca, I hope you're listening because you did incredible work this week. I want this whole story in physical book form, framed, some kind of recognition because holy crap, I will be reading it again for sure as inspiration for my future work. I hope one day that I can capture Lovecraftian horror as well as you did right here. Awesome job. Our next story this week is The Light by J.M. Gooding. And I heard a few good things about this one, so I was excited to dive into it. And I'll tell you right now, if there's one thing I can count on from J.M., it's that he'll always take my prompts and do something profoundly unique with them. This piece takes me back to the first one I ever read from him, and it reminds me why I will be a fan of his work for as long as I possess eyes and the ability to read. In this story, J.M. turns the lighthouse itself into a character. He meaningfully and purposefully spends time in the beginning of the story making sure that we're acquainted with every aspect of it, not as a building and not as a utility, but as something that thinks and feels. And then, with that literal foundation in place, he brings in our lighthouse keeper and ties everything together into a tale that tears at the heartstrings. And again, this is where J.M. shines. His dialogue in particular here carries so much weight. He's smart with word choice, intentional with how he keeps sentences short. He lets the words carry emotion on their own, and the best part is that you'll feel it. And I mean really feel it, which is the sign of truly great writing. And I gotta shout out the musical pairing here. It evokes precisely the right emotions. I actually listened to it again while writing this shout out, and it's really driving home the story's themes in a way that musical pairings should. It's an honor and a privilege to read work like this every week, so thank you, my friend JM. I know you're a listener every week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your work. Amazing stuff. Next up, we've got Angel's Envy by Mina Howell. With this piece, Mina channels Edgar Allan Poe not with an homage, but with a continuation of Annabel Lee and the themes it evoked. Naturally, she brings in her own style, which is still, again, some of the best poetry I've ever read every time she does poetry. And every line here is haunting. Every rhyme rings true, and the musical pairing at the end, again, is exceptional. I'm seriously so happy to see more people doing the musical pairings because it's really awesome to reflect on the piece with that musical accompaniment. And here I gotta shout out Jennifer Jorgensen's comment on this piece. She mirrors many of my thoughts in her review, and I honestly don't think I could say it better. So Jennifer, I hope you don't mind if I read your comment on the show here. Here's what Jennifer had to say about Mina's piece. This is such a smart way to engage with Annabel Lee. Not imitation, but interrogation. I love how you took Poe's romantic obsession and tilted it just enough to become unsettling instead of idealized. The lighthouse as a decaying guardian, the question of whether love is protection or imprisonment, and that final uncertainty about memory and identity all really made it come together beautifully. It feels like a sequel that argues with the original instead of worshipping it, which is exactly what a reimagining should do. Beautiful, eerie, quietly uncomfortable in the best way. Loved it. Yep, Jennifer hit the nail on the head. Exactly. I love how she says that it argues with the original instead of worshiping it. Like I said, I don't think I could have put my thoughts into words better than that. So thank you to Jennifer for leaving such a great comment on the piece. That was a perfect way of describing it. Next this week, we have Sanguis Memorans by Mariah K. Porter. My favorite part about this piece is how Mariah throws us right into the setting with a strong opening that leans into confusion and uncertainty. It pulls you right into the world and then slowly meters out revelations that help you see the full picture. I loved this story's use of time as well. Not only does it take place over the course of multiple days, but it eventually multiplies that scope to centuries as the final pieces fall into place. The slow unraveling of the larger tale here really makes this piece immensely engaging for me, and the ending is exceptional as well. It's a final mic drop moment punctuated by some phenomenal lines of dialogue. Great work from Mariah this week, and a captivating story from beginning to end. Next up, we have Between Worlds by Mary Ellen Brady. I was really glad to see Mary Ellen send over a story for this week's prompt because I knew she would do something amazing. There's actually a comment on this story from Mina Howell that I have to call out as well because, again, it's a perfect review. In her comment, Mina told Mary Ellen that the story has just the right amount of horror mixed with mystery and your personal brand of magic stitching it all together. Yes! Once again, could not have said it better myself. Mary Ellen's strengths shine when she layers in multiple genres, layers of narrative, and balances all of it expertly over the course of the story. I like how she lures us in with a strong sense of mystery before pulling the veil back and revealing a superb level of backstory and lore behind the events of the story. And I like how she did all this world building organically, using journal entries and dreamlike visions to show the dark history behind the setting and the characters. And it's not the fact that Mary Ellen excels at these things on their own, it's the way that she combines them together with perfect balance that puts her stories over the top. Mary Ellen is just one of those writers that literally can't miss. It's always amazing reading work from her. Our next story this week is Salt and Rust by Elizabeth Hagenlocker. I love how Elizabeth says at the beginning that this piece had her typing like a person possessed. It's amazing when a prompt gets people inspired like that. First of all, I have to compliment the quality of the writing here. The way Elizabeth approached this story with elegance and grace makes me feel like I stumbled upon some lost work of Edgar Allan Poe. It's gothic horror in every sense of the word, right down to how the story itself reads. And speaking of Poe, I love the use of the phrase thump, thump, thump. It appears throughout the story, giving me flashbacks to The Telltale Heart in the best way. I just love how much weight the words carried here, and how powerful the connection felt between characters. Awesome work from Elizabeth this week, and another standout Gothic horror tale. Next up, we've got The Case of the Haunted Lighthouse by Robert C. Worstel. With this piece, Robert offers up a non-canonical short story from the Ghost Hunter series. I liked how Robert was able to weave in backstory and world building into this piece while still staying within the word count limit. He uses dialogue for this purpose primarily, but exposition is leveraged as well. The story introduces characters from the prompt, but our protagonist here is actually there to interview them and write their story, which I thought was a cool twist. There's also a nice little balance of humor in here, and the jokes land while also humanizing the characters in a way I wasn't expecting. A fun read from Robert, and great work again this week. Next up, we've got Ferris Mortuum by Matthew E. Muir. With this piece, Matthew adopts an amazing first-person writing style that feels like a mixture between a personal journal entry and traditional prose. I love how the balance here pulled me into the world and the characters, though. Our protagonist in this one is a third party. They are someone who gets pulled into the elements of the prompt, and honestly, I hadn't considered an approach like that, so I'm a big fan of how Matthew took things here. And on a final note, the imagery in this story is a standout element. The descriptions are vivid and extremely well written. It feels like a period piece in that way, like this would have come out around the same time as Lovecraft and other contemporaries. It's really great work. Next, we have The Lighthouse by Jada Halliday. So Jada just recently joined Substack, and someone recommended the power-up prompts to her, which is really awesome. And I gotta say, Jada's story here is probably the most unique take on the prompt this week, by far. It opens with our character having a conversation with various versions of themselves. Versions that are louder, quieter, more angry, or more understanding. This is a crazy unique opening, and it allows the reader to immediately learn a ton about the protagonist in just a few lines, while also showcasing some really sharp dialogue that's packed with personality. And this is used to tell a story of an internal struggle and a decision that must be made that bleeds out into the real world by the end of the story. It's fantastic. A great first entry from this new author. Check the show notes for a link, and let's give her a warm welcome. Next, we've got The Mercy of Refusal by Connor Mancuso. We've got an exquisite first line here, yet again, like Jennifer's story earlier. In Connor's story, he says, "The lighthouse had been dead for decades, yet it still stood with the stubborn posture of a sentry that had forgotten the war was over." Now that is how you hook your readers. Interestingly, this is one of the few times I've seen a piece from Connor that isn't done in his typical epic poetry style. It's actually more traditional prose. But it bears the signs of his style, and it does dabble a little bit in poetry as it goes on. The piece here really exemplifies Connor's capacity to create an atmosphere of emotion that sort of hums in the background throughout his stories. Once he establishes this background layer, it never wavers in his work, and I love that. It's great for immersion, and it keeps the readers fully locked in the whole time. Every word carries weight as a result. It also brings in elements of dread as the story goes on. There's a line where you can feel hope itself collapse that reads, "The prison was a wound, stitched, never healed." Beautiful work from Connor, as always, and one of the most consistently amazing authors on Substack. If you're not already caught up on his work, now's the time. Next, we have The Keeper Counts by Abhishek Banerjee. So Abhishek describes this story saying, "This is Gothic horror as vertical architecture, sky, judgment, sea, erosion, and the narrow middle where the keeper remains, counting until counting is all that's left." As always with this author's work, I love how they take their time with the details. The opening paragraphs are elegant and intentional. It dwells on all the details for just a moment, but it does so in a way that builds imagery and atmosphere. And as the story goes on, the use of italics and block quotes to convey dialogue is a nice touch. It just makes everything stand out, and it really emphasizes those lines as a result. The sense of longing and duty in this story is beautiful as well. The final moments especially are still echoing in my mind. I love how the lines became shorter as we settled in on a truth that we've known all along, that the keeper will do what they do best. All right, and our final power-up prompt story for this week is Memory is the Lock by Daniel Coates. And again, we have a story here that offers up a wildly unique take on the prompt. The concept here is that our guardian has become old and her memories are faded. She lives in the lighthouse guarding something in the basement, but she's not entirely sure why. Meanwhile, a lovely nurse named Nate comes to check on her. As the story goes on, things quickly take a dark turn near the end where these and other revelations come to light. Now, I don't want to spoil everything here because you really should read it, but the way that Daniel structured this piece is a standout for me. It had me guessing all the way to the very end, and the reveals were indeed satisfying. I honestly wish it was longer. I'm quite intrigued at what happened, and I want to know what's going to happen next after the shocking conclusion. Really great work from Daniel this week. And that concludes our power-up prompt stories. So I'll have to go back and count past prompts, but like I said, I think this might be the most entries we've ever had. So note to self, do more gothic horror prompts, apparently. Okay, next up, we'll take a look at this week's indie release radar, powered by BookStack. Hey, Arnold, ready to check out some new indie releases?
Yeah, and I brought tea.
Oh, nice. You drink tea now.
Yeah, it pumps up my mind.
Oh, nice. Are you drinking, what, lion's mane?
Why would I drink a lion? Oh, now that you mention it though, that's not a bad idea.
No, Arnold, lion's mane is a mushroom. When you brew it into tea, it helps you focus.
It gives me superpowers. You mean I can read faster?
I mean, sure, why not? Maybe, who knows?
Okay, I'll get some after this. In the meantime, try my protein tea.
Oh, Arnold, is this just a hot protein shake?
It's protein tea!
Okay, let's get into this week's releases. Little Wolf in the Storm, Volume 1, stars Zhang Xiaolin and Lei Wang, who both seem like normal people on the surface, but both of them harbor dangerous secrets. In particular, Lei wants to kill Zhang, but when Zhang shows up one day to hire Lei for his healing services, he hesitates to set his plan in motion. Zhang begins flirting with him non-stop, wishing to be the first one to break down Lei's emotional walls. Will these enemies find a reason to forgive each other and perhaps become something more? Find out when Little Wolf in the Storm, Volume 1, releases on January 13th. Next up, Frost and Iron is the first book in the Ashland Chronicles series from author Adele Lane. This sweeping post-apocalyptic sapphic epic combines political intrigue, survival, found family, slow burn romance, and high-stakes frontline action. Lark Suitor has never feared the wilds of Salt Marsh Reach, but when a raider attack leaves her friend on the brink of death, Lark is driven to the last place she ever thought she'd go, Verdancia's gleaming capital. Now she must demand aid from a queen she has no reason to trust. Will Lark and the queen see eye to eye in time to save their respective people from ruin? Find out when Frost and Iron releases on January 20th. And third, Perfect Strangers is an upcoming vacation romance from author Jay Reese. It stars Evander Weston, a hotshot lawyer who decides to take his honeymoon alone after being left at the altar. He soon meets Heath Lennox, a bookworm who's also been stood up by the person he was supposed to meet. When these two find out their resort is a couples-only retreat, they decide to pose as newlyweds so they can get by. Will circumstances lead to a friendship and perhaps something more? Find out when Perfect Strangers releases on January 20th. And thank you to BookStack for helping get the word out about these new indie releases. Be sure to check the show notes for links to all these titles in case you want to pick one up. Next up, our weekly writing discussion. All right, and for this week's writing discussion, I asked you to talk about how you write warfare and battles in your stories. As I mentioned earlier, my guest on this week's episode is Tom Schechter. Something that came up during our interview was how he approaches warfare in his work. Unlike other stories, he doesn't cut to the victory feast when a battle is ended. He focuses on the aftermath and the trauma the ones fighting are left with. It got me thinking, how do you approach warfare in your work? Do your stories feature large battles or smaller, more subtle fights? Do you show the trauma that fighters suffer from in the wake of these battles, the wars they wage in their minds, if you will? There were a lot of great responses this week in my subscriber chat, so let's take a look at what everyone had to say. First up, Loki Cone says, haven't yet at least, write about big battles in my stories. No armies or gunfire ripping up the fields. The real fights come small and up close. A hard look across a dark room. Fists balled on a table. A guy holding back from hitting the one he loves. That's how it goes. Two people locked in it or just one against himself. Simple words hit hard. No yelling needed. And the hurt sticks around after. Like smoke when the fire's gone cold. Two people sit there quiet, eyes flat, carrying those ghosts right in their bones. And again, Loki Cone with the amazing and poetic response. They just can't stop winning. I love everything they write. But in all seriousness, this is great, and I have seen this come through in their work. I actually love these kind of smaller, more subtle battles in stories. I think that's where we really get to know the characters on a deeper level. So great answer to start us off. Next up, Mariah K. Porter says, the battles in my books tend to be emotional, political, or magical, rather than physical. My main characters already carry trauma when the story begins, whether it's from a literal war or a mental one, and from there, my stories are more about reconciling what they carry with a world that is moving on without them in an unpleasant direction. As a writer, I'm coming from the perspective of, I've already done the fighting, I want to know if Happily Ever After can still exist despite everything that has already been lost. Wow, incredible. I love that last part. Yeah, that's really interesting. I like the idea of kind of starting the story with them already carrying the trauma. That's fascinating. And yeah, the part about the world moving on without them is just, oof, yeah. Some really great themes there from Mariah, and honestly, yet another reason to read her work. Amazing. Next up, Anton Anderson says, my first novel has a relatively large battle. There, I focused on what the main character was feeling and doing, yet I did think quite long about the logistics and showed a lot of it before the battle began. In my second novel, there were only smaller fights. In my third novel, I again had a large battle, but since it was a flashback, I focused on the cool sci-fi and fantasy elements rather than the characters. Both approaches are valid, I think. Cool-looking stuff is valid on its own merit, and diving into why the battle began and why the characters were thinking and feeling in the moment is always good, too. If you combine the two, that would be a big bonus. It is important for the battle to make sense. Do more of Helm's Deep and less of the battle in the last season of Game of Thrones. Yeah, I agree with that. Don't forget to use all the senses: sight, sound, touch, and smell. Don't forget to make sure that the reader understands what's happening, where the characters are, who's winning, what the stakes are, and why all of that is the way it is. Yes, phenomenal advice from Anton there. It actually brings to mind the article that I did about writing battle scenes, and which included a lot of these things here. So yes, great advice from Anton on how to kind of approach battles different ways. Fantastic. Next up, Richard Loader says, the only story I've done on here so far with a battle is a bit of a unique situation, as the setting in both sides of the battle admit nothing but malice and madness due to an outside factor. So, the protagonist leading the victorious side is somewhat unique in that they cared little for their enemy and innocent lives, at least externally. But internally, there's actually a power struggle going on between them and another side of their consciousness that cares for life and peace. Interesting. Showing that inner struggle was the most important aspect to me, as it was really the only part that presented the characters having any kind of humanity, really. Then I laced it with past lore to show that it wasn't really the protagonist or anyone living in this diabolical place's fault. Their madness and hostile behavior was not of their own doing. I'm sure you can probably guess the story I'm referring to, Bradley. Yes, absolutely. Yes. The title escapes me, but as I'm reading that, I'm going to go, wait a second. I've definitely seen this before. Good stuff. Thank you, Richard. Next up, Jennifer Jorgensen says, I've only written about small fights, one-on-one or two-on-one style. I have no training in martial arts or any fighting styles, so I tend to try and keep those scenes short and simple, lest I end up showing off my lack of experience and knowledge in that area. I suspect, given that reasoning, any battles I do will probably focus more on the strategic and on specific small fight scenes within the larger battle. Totally fair and a good approach from Jennifer there. Honestly, I've enjoyed everything she's written so much that she can do whatever she wants when it comes to battle scenes, and I will read it. But that is good advice, so thank you, Jennifer. All right, next up, J. Allen Winchester starts off strong, saying, cracks knuckles and positions dodecatheon canvas behind chair. Here's what he had to say. I'm a firm believer in actions have consequences, so I follow the characters in the wake of their conflicts. Many of my earlier development years revolved around how the past affects the present and possibly the future. I think the most I've delved into this is with my Greek epic saga. The end of the world already happened, and as everything was burning, the Greco are forced out into the fallout nuclear destruction the world over. Their anger toward humanity was rightfully deserved, but there are trickle-down effects over the centuries to the current time. Civil war is about to break out after the injustices and discrimination from the Greco. Things have come full circle. Many of the cast is living with scars both physically, psychologically, emotionally, and even spiritually. The first book has a clash, but I focused on the immediate events and less on the side occurrences to stay within the characters I'm working with. In the current draft of the second dodecatheon book, there's an assault on a city-state I'm fleshing out which results in the right amount of chaos to open a path to resolution. It's the cause and effect, the reaction to the action, the fallout of the strike that I write. Admittedly, most of the bigger instances of this are in draft form, but I hope to showcase more of that in Dodeca shorts and other books in the future. Another saga that has a significant battle is Nature Calls, where the cosmos itself is assaulting the planet. As if humanity's BS wasn't enough, right? In the draft for Winter, the battle plays out, and there are immediate events that follow it. The consequences ripple through the years, which some might curse my name for, but these types of adventurers usually end on some somber or tearful moments that stick with us. That's typically the way I see war and trauma. It's just like any conflict, only it has wider-reaching ripple effect on the souls involved and touches those after. I know I have lived through trauma, personal and generational, and devastation, so when I approach it in writing, I make sure the character development utilizes the circumstances and consequences of those events on the character's motivations and actions. I, as the writer, just try to remind the reader that not all is lost if we do what we can with the time we are given. Thanks, Tolkien. Many of my writing involves the battles within us, though, the shadows of our hearts, the monsters we fight every day, and how we either endure or triumph over them. I've never liked feeling like a victim, even though I know I could have claimed that role. As much as I delved face first into the heaviness of the mind and soul, I also try to offer healing and hope. I don't want to leave my readers without it. Too often I had to grope in the dark for answers, resources, and hope with no one but myself to rely on. The things that push me through were my faith and fiction, so I used my magic to offer what I needed and learned for others as a light in their dark. Wow, I always look forward to Jaden's inputs on these each week. They are always just so beautifully composed and packed with wisdom. That last section about the battles within us, I mean, chills. Chills, chills, chills. Thank you so much, Jaden, as always, for really taking the time to respond thoughtfully every single week. I really appreciate you. All right, next up, Daniel Coates says, I tend to write or think I write battles similarly to J.M. Gooding. Focus on the POV and show things from their perspective to ground the reader, even as bigger things are happening around. However, I do tend to go now for the coolness factor in my fights. I handle the tragedy and subtlety in the before and after, especially via implications that I allow the reader to make. Or at least that's the intention. I try to leave that room for the reader to make personal connections and conclusions rather than showing them directly. And speaking of, we'll do J.M. Gooding next. Probably should have done it beforehand, but that's fine. So J.M. Gooding here says, when writing actual warfare battles, I approach it from the protagonist's point of view. There could be a huge, epic, greater battle going on around the MC, but the protagonist's POV is the most important for the story I'm trying to tell. And yes, I do often linger on the after effects of that battle, be it a physical one or a mental, emotional battle. The point of the battle is to understand how the fight affected them. That doesn't change between physical and emotional battles. Yeah, so taking that in conjunction with Daniel's response here, I really agree with that. I think there is a very similar approach to both physical and emotional battles, and when you're dealing with something that big in scope and that complex, writing from a specific POV or a couple POVs is a great way to keep things grounded while also kind of showcasing multiple angles. Great stuff. Next up, Nicholas Barely says, I've completed a project/album looking at war from a few perspectives, but I've never written a huge battle scene. Maybe one day. I always enjoy the war stories that ground themselves in smaller portions of battles or individual perspectives. Great stuff from Nicholas there, and I would love to see what he does with that. Also, sounds like you'd be a fan of both Daniel and JM's work, which is great. I love it. All right, and last but not least, if you pop into that thread in my subscriber chat from this week, you'll find also a link from Tom Schechter himself that he was discussing with a few people in the thread. Wanted to call that out in case you want to track that down. And of course, I'll be including links to Tom's work in the show notes. So a big thank you to everyone who responded this week with answers to our writing discussion. Love doing those every week. And speaking of Tom, next up is our featured guest interview, right after a quick mindful moment. Hey there, this is Chill Bradley, here with this week's mindful moment. Here's a quote to consider. I'm a writer. I write not only for a living, I write because I'm a writer. Gary Jennings. As we all know, writing is more than a profession. It's an art form. It's a means of expression. It's a way of life. When I say that I'm a writer, I'm talking about more than my day job. I'm talking about who I am as a person. You see, writing is a part of me, and it always will be. And honestly, I love that. Will some people roll their eyes at me for making writing my whole personality? Oh, absolutely. In fact, I've had people tell me to my face that I'm exhausting. But you know what? I could care less what they think. I'm a writer. Professionally, creatively, and as a human being. Writing runs through my veins. This community gives me drive and purpose beyond anything else I've encountered in my time here on this earth. So, you're damn right, I'm going to make it my personality. Because this is what makes me happy. and that has to count for something. So for this week's Mindful Moment, think about how your art defines you, and why that's amazing. Don't let anyone, no matter how close they are to you, tell you otherwise. Thanks for listening. Back to the show. Or, you know what? Maybe not. Wandering prompt 0111626. Write a story or poem about a battle with no beginning and no end. An eternal war. 1,000 words or less. First to post a link in the comments wins. A second story will be chosen as others are submitted. Good luck. Okay, and we're back for real this time. For this week's guest interview, I'm excited to welcome a brand new guest to the show who has an ongoing dark literary fantasy series he's writing. But he also somehow has time to participate in mutual aid efforts that I found incredibly inspiring to talk about. He's a fantastic writer, and honestly, an even better human being. So, get comfortable, grab yourself a drink, and let's get into this week's featured guest interview. All right, everybody, and this week on the Saved as Draft podcast, I'm excited to welcome an educator, musician, history enthusiast, and author of the Shieldbreaker saga. Please welcome to the show, Tom Schechter. Tom, thanks for being here.
How's it going? Thank you so much for having me on.
So let's start off by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your creative journey thus far.
My creative journey thus far. So I played in bands for a whole bunch of years.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it, and also after the pandemic, and as I started a family, it became basically impossible to schedule things like rehearsals, and even more impossible to schedule things like shows. This is actually my first writing project in probably close to 20 years.
Wow. Okay.
And, I've really enjoyed it so far. I've really enjoyed getting it out there to people so far. And I've made a bunch of cool new friends and who are talented as all hell. And so, yeah, it's been really rewarding and enriching. And, it's probably made me a better writer hanging out here too. It's been great fun.
Good, nice. When you had a band, what type of music was it, and what role did you play in the band?
I mostly the singer-songwriter, but in hard rock settings. So depending on what was available to me, I would either be playing guitar and bass and singing.
Okay. Nice.
When I had a guitar player who was much better than I was, I'd be like, yes, please, you do that, and I will play the easier instrument. So much better. Whatever it took to make the thing sound better would be, perfectly fine for me. I was just, happy to get out there and play and sound, at least as far as I could tell at that moment, we sounded good. It's hard to listen to those recordings this many years later, but not because of anything the guys around me did. They were very, very good. I just had a real fun habit of drinking a lot of whiskey before I recorded vocals, and oops.
I understand.
It was of its time.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So you mentioned that this is kind of this new writing projects you've been working on. These are the first ones you've done. You said in 20 years.
Yeah, I think the last time I actually presented a finished piece of fiction to somebody was junior year of undergrad.
Wow, okay.
For a creative writing class that I wasn't taking very seriously. And I've had this idea for a story in my head for 15, 20 years and didn't have several components necessary to make it worth pursuing. And then those kind of all popped up one after the other over the course of very, very, very slowly over the course of that 15 years and made it worth writing. And luckily I remembered enough words to do a decent job of it so far, apparently. People seem to be digging it, and that's, again, obviously gratifying. And it's been mostly just really fun to explore a lot of other people's minds and imaginations and feelings, and without having to really, honestly, I spend as little time as I have. I am a parent first these days, and as little time as I have to actually get into the development of it. I love even just that hour I get now and then, or a half hour, even just hanging out at 10 o'clock at night, walking the dog, and just outlining or brainstorming new trouble for these poor bastards to get themselves into. It's it's a lot, and it's also allowing me to explore a lot of stuff that I've had on my mind over the course of my life, and kind of not necessarily process it, but just kind of just allow it to sit out there and see where it hits, and see what parts of it are something I still believe, and what parts of it are just kind of not there anymore. And it's a philosophical exercise, and it's an imagination exercise, and I love it very much. It's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. So how long have you been working on this current project, the Shieldbreaker saga, right?
Yeah. So sometime in the early 2010s, I think. It might have even been before that, but it was definitely not before like 2011, or not after 2011. At some point, I had this kind of Godfather, but in the desert, and a bunch of ancient guys running around stabbing each other, getting revenge for stuff idea. And the problem was I didn't have anything else but that. And so my first 40 odd pages were just such unspeakable garbage. Just terrible. And so I put it in a drawer for a long, long, long time. It must have been at least 10 years. And during the pandemic, when I was sitting at home really for the first time, was a vast transition in my daytime job, from running a tutoring practice where I'm driving around to people's houses, to all of a sudden sitting at home and then getting on a Zoom call. So much more time on my hands. I'm reading again. This is 2020, reading again, learning German in my spare time for no good reason. All sorts of wonderful things that I hadn't gotten to do in a long time, and got to read a bunch of late ancient period history. There's this author named Peter Heather, British fellow, who did a lot of work on the fall of the Roman Empire in the mid-decade 2000s, let's say 2006 and on, and also about the Justinian reconquest 100 years after that, and then kind of the collapse of the Eastern Roman Empire after the Western one, and how there's this mutually assured destruction war that goes on between the Eastern Romans and the Persians in the early 600s. It actually starts later. It starts in the late 580s and goes to 628. And my favorite thing to tell any history students of mine is that war is the most expensive thing on the menu. So if you fight for 40 years, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
And of course, what happens at the end of that is both of those empires that have been around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years both promptly collapsed under the weight of their own insistence on not stopping the war for any reason whatsoever. And at that exact moment in time is when Muhammad and company show up out of the Arabian desert, and they appear in front of, instead of two massive empires who would have easily hindered their progress, two dried out husks of empires that fall like cheap card tables. And that's how you get the beginning of the medieval world, and that's how you get the caliphate. So for me, I was like, oh, wait, power vacuum. Holy crap. There was a whole bunch of things in there that I didn't have, and now all of a sudden I have. Like, what are these people all doing here? Why are they so hell-bent on getting revenge on all these things? What happened to make this possible in a believable way? And, sure, the names and the place names are all different, and obviously, but it's deeply based in this late ancient history. And that's fun because it's like the opposite of all of the English reconquest fantasy that you read out there. And sure, there's some Cornwell in there, and there's some Viking stuff mixed in because you can't help it because I got influences all over the place. But really, it was about this genuine feeling of something ending, an entire era is ending. And what is the new world going to look like? And who's going to live long enough to see it?
Okay. No, I love that. I love that. That actually brings me nicely to my next question, which is, of course, what are your main sources of inspiration? Obviously, it sounds like history, and like that kind of stuff is definitely a big inspiration. But where else do you kind of go to get inspired for your work?
Let's see. Favorite fantasy series of all time: Andrzej Sapkowski's Witcher Saga.
Okay.
The Godfather, as I mentioned, Mario Puzo is one of the really, really, I think, almost forgotten how good he was because of how famous the movie wound up getting. But The Godfather, the novel, is really powerful shit in its own late 60s problematic ways. But, the man really did understand how to build characters. And, let's see who else. David Milch, especially The Deadwood on HBO, early 2000s. That's a hill I will die on. Best show ever put on the airwaves. Vikings. Over the course of the last dozen years or so, a lot of the History Channel show Vikings wound up being an inspiration. The saga of Ragnar and his sons. And I think when you mix all those things together with this late ancient period Middle Eastern history, what you get is conglomeration of all of these different vibes and all of these different sources that allowed me to make something that maybe not entirely original, but definitely not something we've seen in a while. Certainly not. Western fantasy doesn't see much like this, I don't think. And that honestly attracted me to it more.
Yeah.
That felt like a new perspective, and that it felt in and of itself definitely worth it.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love how you're kind of pulling elements from all different types of history and kind of different, source material to sort of piece together a brand new world, if you will. That's really cool. I like that a lot. So how long have you been here on Substack, and what's your experience been like thus far?
I came in, I want to say September 2024, and had no idea what I was doing. I had the first 10 chapters finished. I had, the novel, The Last of the Atella, finished, and I had parts of the next 4 novels finished. And I really didn't know what I was doing. And part of the way that became very obvious to me was how hard it got to just get the first 5 or 10 subscribers, and how few people initially were paying any attention to my stuff, especially since, I don't know if you took a look at it, but my chapters tend to run a little tiny bit on the longer side.
They are big chapters, yes.
Unapologetically long chapters, and I don't mean to ruin anything for anybody, but book 2, actually, the average word count per chapter went up by 1,000 words.
That's so funny.
It was a choice.
Yeah.
And the reason for that choice, I will actually get into at a certain point, but we're not really there. When I answer the question you're actually asking first, the most important thing that I found was I found a few authors that I really dug. Most of them decidedly outside of genre, more in the literary fiction side of things. And there are a few reasons for that I don't really feel like I have to get into, but more along the lines of the people that I've vibed with were not really in the fantasy side of things. The fact that it was an election year may have had a little tiny bit to do with that, and we're not going to go into that. Enough probably has been said about that already, except to say I'm very glad that I found the people that I found, and on November 5th or 6th, I was very close to quitting the platform, and found a few people in the very, very short term after that who made it worth it to stick around, and who I was able to kind of put together a little bit of a mutual aid collective with over the course of this past year, that has made, I'm going to tell you, I'll level with you, marketing, really not my strongest point. I don't have I don't know whether it's the attention span or the blind self-belief or whatever the hell it is you want to call it, to just walk around shouting, "Ask me about my novel," to everybody
Right.
that I come across.
Yeah.
And to be able to instead focus on, wow, these wonderful, talented, skilled artists who are falling on hard times, and could use a little bit of an opportunity, because I've had to market myself as as an entrepreneur in the tutoring space, so I understand how to do it. I just don't love talking about myself enough that I would be my first choice of ways to market this book.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me to be able to talk up a bunch of my friends, get more eyeballs on them, especially in moments where they were in need of eyeballs, and then have people look at my work as as an after effect of that,
Mm-hmm.
and find out that it was something that they liked. Yeah, it's indirect, and even if they hadn't liked my work, I still would have been very, very happy to have done the good things that we've done with my friends in fiction as culture, which
Mm-hmm.
is, or we the undersigned, or whatever the hell it is that we want to call ourselves. Um, that makes this whole process really more meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to just shout, "Look at me, look at me, look at me." It's,
Right.
look at me. This is actually something important. This is actually an opportunity to do some good and feel good about yourself for doing some good.
Mm-hmm.
And do I feel good about myself having done this good? Bet your ass. It's a positive and reinforcing cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to do that for, I guess we've run half a dozen of these. I'm sorry. It's okay if I curse a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't good. Yeah, thank. I was trying to behave myself, but now if you're going to allow me my full range of expression, it's really been a fucking treat to be able to do this over the course of this past year, and it has made, the fact that I've gotten some positive attention from the writing that much sweeter, because it came from a place where, I was able to really genuinely make some impact and
Mm-hmm.
do some good. And I think this year there has been a lot of feelings of hopelessness
Yeah.
in a lot of camps,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to do anything, any small thing, to counteract that is in itself the big win.
Yeah. Definitely. No, I wholeheartedly agree. I've taken a very similar approach to kind of, I guess you could say marketing my work, but I'm also, as I'm sure you know, very community oriented, very focused on lifting up other writers. I always say that a rising tide raises all ships, right? So it helps me as much as it helps them. Yeah.
It does. And that's a nice byproduct.
Mm-hmm.
And, get to do some good first.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I could not agree more. That's wonderful. Well, I'm glad you stuck around on Substack, because I love what you're doing. I love the full scope of what you're doing. Obviously, we'll dive deeper into some elements of that as the conversation goes on. In the meantime, my next question here is, for people who aren't familiar with your work, what are some of the common kind of themes and topics that they can expect from, for example, the Shieldbreaker saga?
Beware religious fanatics.
Mm-hmm.
Beware them with your whole brain and whole chest. Also, war is not fun.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of those are the big those seem to be the big overarching sentiments that I have been able to put together. Obviously, each book is going to have something of its own theme. There's, when Jared Lambert.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Paints, Hollers, and Heresy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I love that dude's work. But he asked months and months and months ago, as I was actually wrapping up the first serial drop for Last of the Attila, he asked on some note at random, "What's the theme of your book?"
Mm.
And I didn't have an answer. And I was like, that bothers me. I want to have an answer. And I kind of worked it, and I think the first one is, the theme of the first novel was about, who do you want to be at the end of the world? Who your death is on its way. how do you want to go out?
Mm.
And because there's a second book, because obviously not every single character can die unless you really, really want to write a really short series. And the first book was only 200 or 201 pages long, so I really would have had to pack a whole lot into that. The next book is about how do you move on after you've fought a battle of that ferocity and seen that much suffering.
Mm.
I think there's a lot of, I think in this country, I imagine, I have to imagine, having not been in any sort of combat myself, but the service people who have had the experiences of what 2, 3 uninterrupted decades of foreign war,
Mm-hmm.
and come back, with a head full of nightmares and terrible stories and post-traumatic stress disorder, and I would not have done very well over there.
Yeah.
And I consider myself, lucky to have not had to go. I also have I don't know whether it's, I have a deep, deep sympathy.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like perhaps we missed some of that. I feel like they missed that in the 1920s when a bunch of guys came back from World War One
Mm-hmm.
and had their entire universes turned upside down and nobody knew what to do with it.
Mm.
I think we missed that also in the aftermath of Vietnam.
Mm.
And I think we are massively missing that a lot of the time. And part of it is because of the modern time frame's insistence on sloganeering and flag waving. And we kind of forget about the people.
Mm.
And we just say, support the troops, or, whatever the hell it is you want to say. But like these are people who have had a lot of live ammunition thrown at them and explode around them, and they cannot be having a good time.
Mm.
And I also imagine that the last 3,000-4,000 years of human history, probably every single person who has come back from a battle has had something resembling that experience.
Right.
And like I said, infinite, deep, deep, deep love and sympathy.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that comes through, especially in this next book that is coming out now, among all of the other, plot-related nightmarish shit that is going to happen to our guy Kareva. I also really hope that I've done a decent enough job of getting into enough of our supporting cast's heads that you can see some of that, and you can see some of the way that must just keep hurting forever.
Mm-hmm.
No matter whether and shit, it's supposed to be an analogy of the 600s or 700s, so it's not like they've got much in terms of therapy options. So yeah, I think there's some guilt, some survivor's guilt, and grief, and how do you move forward from that, and how do you remember that, and who, how does everybody else remember it, the people who didn't fight in it, or how do politicians have to maneuver to spin the outcome in their favor?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, what happens after the battle ends?
Right.
Starting with just the chapter that I dropped earlier this week, just how do you clean up after the damn thing is over?
Yeah.
Thousands of bodies baking in the sun. What do we do?
Right.
And if you forget about that, and I think a lot of fantasy that I've read over the course of the time that I've been reading fantasy, some of the best ones don't skip over that. Some of the ones that have really pissed me off are the ones that, and the battle ends and everybody cheers, and then it's like never happened.
Mm.
After the fact, you skip right to the feast.
Right.
There's other steps,
Mm-hmm.
and there's opportunities for actual deep character development in this.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to just write caricatures, maybe forcing some of your guys to stare at those dead bodies for a few pages might be an effective use of your time as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
One man's opinion, and I've definitely done that. There is no end to staring at those bodies for me and some of the, kids,
Mm-hmm.
teenagers, 20-something-year-olds left alive after the first novel. to be looking at this for a long time.
Hmm.
And some of the older officers who are still struggling with battles from years earlier, they're going to be, it doesn't go away, I imagine.
Yeah.
And I don't want to jump in and assume that I know everything, and I hope that I'm not talking out of turn as somebody who did not serve,
Mm-hmm.
because that would be the last thing that I would want. But I want that, I hope very much that love and that, the respect for that pain comes through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's incredible. You brought up so many great points there, and I wholeheartedly agree with what you were saying about how, a lot of fantasy tends to kind of gloss over or almost glorify battles and warfare and stuff like that, when in reality, it's like you said, this is horrible stuff that scars people for life.
Yeah.
And just as you said, if you let that come through in the story, you can really develop very strong characters while also raising awareness around what people who have fought in battles across history have been through.
Not to mention, people living in occupation.
Mm.
One of the best things that I've read over the course of the last 10 years is a journalist named James Verini, who wrote an account of being embedded with the Iraqi army in Mosul in 2016 while they were trying to eliminate the last vestiges of Daesh, of ISIS,
Mm-hmm.
in northern Iraq. And having read that and having watched him humanize people on really all sides, having watched him humanize, the Iraqi soldiers coming in trying to take back the city, having watched him meet and interact with these kids who wind up, they were with Daesh, and they wind up, a lot of them, in, not very pretty circumstances at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
The book is called They Will Have to Die Now.
Mm.
And that is about all you need to know about it to know how it ends, and how, when I say it humanizes people, it's not always flattering.
Right.
But he did an unbelievable job of getting the experience from every angle, from the invading angle, from the defending angle, from the civilians caught in the middle angle. And just really, like, all-timer powerful stuff. And one that I can't recommend highly enough.
Oh wow, yeah, I have to check that out. That sounds like a powerful read. So kind of diving deeper now into your Shieldbreaker saga story, with all these themes in mind, could you give us kind of an overview of the premise of the book and sort of the world that it takes place in?
Yeah, sure. So I did mention already, there's a power vacuum. Mm-hmm. We've got the two ancient empires that have been running this place for centuries, and are both very, very unpleasantly disposed towards one another. And religion, different monotheistic religions, not compatible, although, who's to say. They decide about 60 years before the events of this series, screw it. One of us isn't coming back from this one, and so they engage in what I refer to as the Eternal War, which ends predictably with both of them in complete tatters, just in time for a bunch of, I guess, proto-Mongol-esque horse warriors to come down from the mountains that would be the Caucasus if we were talking about the Middle East and Caucasus region, but we're totally not even a little bit. And the map looks absolutely nothing like that map. I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't even have a map. I have app. I'm keeping deniability for as long as I possibly can here. What do you mean the Middle East looks just like this? So big, new, third, more modern, better fed, better equipped power shows up, starts cleaning house, and in the middle of this power vacuum, and standing in front of this tidal wave is this small pagan civilization, a collection of tribes that have been fighting on one side or the other of the Eternal War as mercenaries for the last 60 years and have become pretty rich, and they are Viking-esque in their desire for a good death in battle. And they are, and this is where that Battle of Mosul comes in. Definitely there's a Peshmerga vibe to them as well. The Kurdistani freedom fighters is definitely, to some extent, an inspiration for this group of people as well. And there are not very many of them, and they are world-class fighters, but they are outnumbered, and they don't got any horses, and they are not united, and one by one the tribes get picked off. And so at the beginning of the action, the last surviving tribe, led by this 19-year-old kid who is the second son of the last high king of all the tribes. And it's kind of a loose, honorific title sort of thing. He influences. There's a reason why the Godfather is part of this. He rules through friendly advice and influence rather than outright orders. Anyway, young Kareva is only set to lead this tribe because his father had to execute his older brother 6 years earlier for treason. There is a prequel novella, The Daughters of Ve, that covers that particular rebellion. And we actually, last weekend, January 10th, a few of my friends and I went on the Television Sky Discord and actually performed, half performed that novella live in front of, I think, 80 or 90 people.
Wow.
Showed up to hang. That was a blast. Absolutely so much fun, and the fact that it was that well attended, again, mind-blowing and full of gratitude. But this kid who has lost his older brother, who has had a very strained relationship with his father in the aftermath, and who now has kind of the weight of the world on his shoulder, is also being haunted by the ghost of that older brother. And or whatever it is, we could call it an actual ghost, we could call it mental illness, and I think I don't want to give more than that.
Sure.
He thinks he's being haunted. I don't want to say definitively one way or the other, but I will say that when the older brother's specter shows up, young Kareva tends to get a little bit stabby. And in a situation where the stakes are high enough that one wrong move can lead to the full-on extinction of his people, he stabs the living shit out of the envoy sent to collect his surrender / loyalty / fealty for this new warlord of the Northern Horsemen. And things escalate, I guess, from there. That about do it? I don't want to completely hand everything over, but from there, Kareva continues to get more and more violent and crazier, and we've got a war on our hands that they have no chance of winning.
Right. No, I think that is a phenomenal setup. Thank you for that. I think a lot of people are going to hear that and go rushing to start reading, because that's a great pitch.
That is the goal.
That is always the goal. Yes.
I think my tag, like I said, doing a little bit of marketing. So my tag was, I think, something like "A people's last hope for survival is a 19-year-old kid who may be out of his fucking mind."
Phenomenal. I love that. That's great. So the performance of the prequel novella that you mentioned, is that recording available on your Substack?
That is live. We had some very good, very close friends. Some of the Fiction is Culture crew came out to read it. My dear friend Slater Hanate, Haley Dieringer, who goes by the Moonlit Bard. Who else? We had Emily Hurricane come in to do some spot vocals. Vinnie Reeds, who played across from Haley's Berserker Shield Maiden Kivli. Vinnie plays the Prince. Verity the Younger, who does not have a great time. And then we had rounding out the cast was actually Will Christopher Bear, which was a real trip, because to have a guy who's had some legit notoriety over the course of his writing career be interested enough to read some of my shit aloud was it was a little tiny bit mind blowing. I was pretty pumped about that.
That is cool.
So was Hurricane.
Yeah.
Honestly, so were we all. It was a blast. We had a great time, and so far it's been well received, and hopefully we'll be able to regroup and do it again. I think that's one of those things where that would be a great way to boost our colleagues' fiction. We could all put 3 or 4 hours of our Saturday night aside once a month or once every 6 weeks, and read a bunch of good work out loud and just have a few laughs as we mangle some of the pronunciation.
Oh man, that is fantastic. So I will definitely make sure to include a link then to that in the show notes of the episode here.
Lovely, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, because I'm going to check it out for sure, and I want to make sure other people do as well. That's amazing. Yeah, I was going to say, since I've been on Substack, I've been practicing more with kind of voice acting and narration, and it's just, for example, I have a fantasy / sci-fi universe where some of my stories are set, and I've always thought of that kind of world and those stories as something that you have to hear the audio, because there's just certain things that only come through that way, and so it gets me really excited to hear that you're doing something similar with your work.
Yeah, there's a lot of hard Z's.
Yeah.
In the naming of my characters and of the battle companies, like their war bands within the larger army, and just to have to panicking send out a note about pronunciation of like, okay, guys, we're on Discord like the morning before we're doing this.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, here, I'm going to speak into the microphone and just pronounce everything I can think of.
Right.
And I missed a few. It's unavoidable. We also had, if you do watch, I think you're going to want to skip to like minute 18, which is where the performance actually begins in earnest, because before that we had some fun little technical difficulty stuff. It is exactly as it should be.
Right.
It was the most professional thing the six of us had ever done together.
Yeah, these things are bound to happen.
But it's great, and it means the next one will be slightly less messy.
Right.
And that'll be fun. And by the time I'm ready to read any more of my work, I will give everybody at least a year to master all the pronunciation. We'll be seasoned veterans.
Right. No, I love that. So is the prequel then, for example, the performance that we'll link to in the show notes, is that a good place to start for someone who's brand new to your work? Like, should they start there and then go to the Shieldbreaker saga? Or what's the order?
Okay. There's a start here link that I've pinned to the top.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest book 1 first.
Okay.
And that's kind of a dick move for me to say out loud, because book 1 is also, at this point, after chapter 2, behind the paywall. I'm sorry. It is what it is.
It is what it is, yeah.
It's also available on Barnes & Noble as an ebook for under $7. So I'm not, and anybody who buys and DMs me a receipt gets a free year subscription of the Substack, which will allow them things like live readings of all the chapters as I do them. I don't want to, I would much rather sell the book and then give away the bonus content on here and then not have to give Hamish any money. But yeah, I think book 1 first, because it sets a little bit more of the in media res.
Okay.
And you get to know your actual main characters who are going to be, flashing back during that prequel novella. The prequel novella, the text of it is also available entirely for free on Substack.
Okay, right.
And my policy is going to be, until I print it, until it's available for sale as a book, it's free.
Sure.
That's how we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And so for me, book 1 is a good place to start, because it gives you really the stakes, and it gives you, after the fact, what's, how bad is it? It gives you the question to ask, how bad was this rebellion that everybody's dealing with the aftermath of 6 years later? While, because that's part of the thing, is he's got to deal with the aftermath of his broken, he's got to deal with his tribe being broken. He's got to deal with him, with them being completely outnumbered, and they're not really gelling as a group, because, he has to pardon a bunch of, he's got to have as many guys as possible. He's got to pardon a bunch of people that everybody assumed would never pick up a sword again as long as they lived.
Mm-hmm.
And how angry are they at these people and why? And then after the fact, to be able to go back and read that prequel and be like, oh, shit. That is, for me, the way I would suggest it. Although
Okay.
I have had people read Daughters first and then the first book and, also be completely okay with it. But I feel like there's a little bit more explanation of what everybody's doing here
Mm-hmm.
if you start with book one.
Okay. That makes sense. Very, very, very fair answer. So, wanted to shift focus here. Talk a little bit about your mutual aid work with the Fiction is Culture. Can you kind of give us an overview of that and what you got going on that side of things?
Well, let's see. That happened kind of by accident. A guy I didn't know very well, but was friendly with, but didn't know very well, had his roof collapse on him in the aftermath of a snowstorm last January.
Mm.
And, kitchen completely unusable. It's a rental, and renter's insurance paid out nothing. And now they've got to find a new place to live, and they're not flush, as you'd imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And when you combine all those things, he's in a legit emergency with his family, and he was out offering, insane, ridiculous editing discounts. And I thought to myself, he's going to burn himself to the ground.
Yeah.
And what if there was a way to make him not have to give such horrible, so that he won't even be able to make enough money to do what he's got to do and find himself working to death.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran a suggestion by him, and it worked out reasonably well.
Mm.
And I got in touch with a few people who he was closer to at that point than I was. We're buddies now, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But we got a group of us together and decided, this is Emil Ottoman, the unofficial editor of Substack. And he had started in January doing these free autopsies where you could give him 2,500 words. And for free, he will edit them and take them apart and do it as a post on Substack for everybody to be able to learn not just about the work that he's cutting open, but also to learn some craft for free, just on him as a service to the greater community.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who usually gets $125 as a reading fee for a 2,500 word piece. And so I said to him, basically, my guy, what if we just refused to not pay you?
Mm-hmm.
And what if I was able to line up half a dozen or a dozen people to refuse to not pay you? And that was about the way it played out. And it took at least a chunk of the money he needed and put it in his hands.
Mm.
I don't think we have ever gone, I don't know what the actual number is, because that's not the way this is working. We are not a charity.
Mm-hmm.
We are not taking the money and distributing it ourselves. Our MO is to put eyeballs on somebody who is offering a good service. So when our friend Judith, the opportunity to have her design websites for her fellow Substackers, that was one. Our friend Pablo, who was the second, this was really where it took off a little bit, was in May. We had done this one thing, and we were wondering whether there was going to be another one, and we were wondering, when it was going to happen, because we knew at that point 2025 was already starting to become a shit show for everybody. And when Pablo found himself in the trouble that he found himself in, and was like, okay, he's a poet and he's a chef. And so we offered this menu of sponsor a poem or sponsor a recipe, like a special recipe that he will create for you out of the things that you like to eat most. And so it's about giving people an opportunity to shine,
yeah,
and sell their shit, as opposed to giving people money.
Right.
That's the goal, because we are artists here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the job is for me to promote the artist and then ask for people to help support their fellow artists, because we all know this is a tenuous situation. To be a writer is tenuous in and of itself.
Yeah.
It could easily be any one of us next.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are not all going to have each other's backs, then we are all going to be very fucked when it's our turn.
Yeah.
And so to be able to keep promoting opportunity and to be able to drive traffic and eyeballs, and then let the work speak for itself, because I'm not going to, it would be much harder for me to promote something that I didn't believe in, but it was lucky that we were able to say, hey, Pablo is a Michelin star level chef. And I don't know whether you ever got to read any of the Michelin poetry that Pablo put out over the summer on that Fiction is Culture initiative, but the poetry he dropped knocked us the fuck over. And those poems might not have happened if not for us providing an opportunity and providing a platform for sponsorship.
Right.
When we say fiction is culture, and sure, it's poetry, whatever, I don't care. I'm not going to split hairs here.
Yeah.
Writing is culture, literature, right? Whatever you want to call it, however you want to handle that part of it. For us, it's if you look at some of the skill, if you look at the ability and also at the skill, because these are people who work this shit. You look at the skill on hand in our circle of friends, and you remember that the age of Elizabeth was the age of Shakespeare, and you remember that the age of the Italian Renaissance was the age of Dante Alighieri, and you remember that, the big, important times and the big, important art comes when it's needed. Those happened after some pretty rough years in Italy. The Renaissance starts right after the Black Death.
Right. Yeah.
And, there was the whole Protestant Catholic wars in the 1500s in England, and all the chaos of Edward VI and Bloody Mary before the Elizabethan age. Art creates culture. And if we have an opportunity to have a say, we should use that to the best of our ability, and we should all be excited about the opportunity to raise each other up, and give this platform, make as much extra noise, boost the signal as much as possible, whether that's on Substack or elsewhere. And when it's collective, everybody wins, as opposed to what I think the Substack founding partners would prefer, which is everybody competes for the most paid subscriptions.
Right.
We don't want to play that way. We want to be able to collectively rise up and collectively make noise as a group of artists that have something to say about the world we live in.
Yeah, I love that so much. That mirrors a lot of what I'm trying to do in my side of the community, and I think everyone listening will absolutely agree with that sentiment. So I love the sound of everything you're working on. I think that's an incredibly just amazing pursuit. And I love that you're on the show here, and we can kind of share this with more people, because I really do believe in what you're doing. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. You guys have something good going on here. And it's an opportunity to, like I said, it's an opportunity to boost signal. Everybody hopefully benefits from our conversation.
Exactly.
Larger conversations like this one within all of our groups of fictionistas.
Exactly. Yes. Absolutely. So my next question here, now that we're kind of a little ways into 2026, curious what kind of writing goals or plans do you have for this year? What can readers expect when you coming down the pipeline?
All right. So obviously I just started dropping book 2 as a serial, 10 chapters, each one longer than the last. I believe the last one drops on March 15th. Auspicious day. And my plan is to kind of push for a month leading up to paperback and ebook release sometime in mid-April.
Okay, nice.
Beyond that, writing-wise, I obviously have some work to do to get book 3 into shape
Mm-hmm.
and book 4, because I have them both pretty well planned out. And there are many more books after the fact, but this first cycle, The Shield Breaker, is going to be 4 novels.
Okay.
The cycle after that, I have a treatment of, but these 4 I have pretty well detailed outlines of. So I'm just working on pushing through this one first big important story,
Mm-hmm.
and then going from there on the next one. We'll worry about that later. I'll need a nap first. I also want probably to drop a couple more prequel novellas.
Mm-hmm.
At least one more, because I've got, just for world building purposes, honestly, a couple of the people who have loved this thing the most have requested to see more of a couple of characters named Uskul, Uskul, son of Erevan, and Uskul the Bastard. So there will, at some point in 2026, be an Uskul and Uskul prequel.
Cool.
And maybe a couple other short stories. We'll see what other opportunities pop up. Because if somebody calls me to do, like Garen Glazer called me to be part of Small and Scary, Big and Beastly last summer, I was like, yes, of course, that was amazing, and that was so much fun to be part of. And a ton of really good writing came out of that. And it was lovely to be able to just throw 1,500 words, just throw one small little vignette into what the world of the Atella looked like before all this cataclysm began.
Right.
To be able to do that a few more times, start filling out a little bit of the universe, and as well as that, actually, I have a dear friend and colleague, JLG Noga, is actually jumping in to write a piece of world building for the world of Breaker. And I'm not going to spend too much time describing what that is, because that's going to be just a beautiful surprise, but it will have no relevance to anybody at all until I'm done dropping book 2. So I'm not going to give it much description yet.
Sure.
But I'm very excited for that. Noga is one of the, Noga's like 22 years old, and he's just, it's not fair that he's 22 and this good. I'm so excited to get to work with him. I'm so pumped, because he's just like, I do throw the word genius around way too generously, but of the geniuses that I know, he is definitely he's in that group.
Totally fair. Yeah. That's amazing. So, my last question here is one that I always ask guests on the show, and basically the gist of it is, looking back on your creative journey thus far and kind of where you are now, what's some advice that you would give to writers who are just kind of starting out, or maybe starting again for the first time in a long time?
What advice would I give to somebody just starting out? Write something you give a shit about and make it believable. Make sure that you put characters first. I think that's really it. I think a lot of writing falls flat when it's just like, I have a really good idea for a plot, and that's it. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Cool action sequence. If you can write it well, great. 50-50. Cool magic system or cool science fiction conceit. Great. Love it. Excellent. And if that's all you've got, and then you don't put real people with like real thoughts and feelings into those situations and make them actually interact with it in a way that's like more than surface level, you're doing your own work a disservice. Care as much about the characters, like truly. And this is a little bit biased for me, because the way that I write, my specific style is I will jump point of view to point of view to point of view, so that every single character that I write, I have to be in their head enough to like understand all of their motivations. And it's not just, and then this happened to this guy. Like, this guy is there. You see him looking at whatever's coming at him. You see him thinking about how he got himself into this position and what he has to do next. What he has to do to, I don't know, survive or get help or benefit from the situation that has arriving. It's not just plot, it's plot plus emotion. What happened and how did everybody feel about it? I think that's kind of a thing that people miss a lot. And it's something that we probably ought to take a little bit more time with.
Sure.
Globally is, instead of, in the world of social media, everybody being reactive to everything all the time and all of the insane biochemical hits that our brains take on a daily basis, maybe writing about the emotion of a moment and actually having to sit and think about it and process the emotion of a moment well enough to put it down on paper is something we can all do a little bit of a better job of for our own benefit, not just for the benefit of our work, but for the global benefit of everybody in the entire writing and reading environment.
Sure. Yeah.
And maybe that was just me spitballing. Maybe I came up with that fully out of my ass right now, but I feel good about it in this moment, and I'm gonna stick with it.
Fair enough. No, I think that's amazing advice. I love asking that question to everyone who comes on the show because I get such a wide range of answers, and I absolutely agree with what you were saying there. I think that is something that, like you said, everybody can benefit from focusing on. So fantastic answer.
Awesome. I'm glad we got it right.
All right, Tom.
I hope I passed the audition.
You did, yes. Yeah, no, Tom, this has been an amazing interview. Honestly, everything you're doing is incredible. The world that you're building is like, from what I've seen of it, it's so rich and so well realized, and I can definitely see your focus on characters in there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and then obviously the performance, like I said, we'll link that in the show notes, and then of course all the mutual aid stuff you're doing. Again, huge. That's very near and dear to me. And so yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again for coming on the show here, for making the time. This has been a truly phenomenal conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank all of your listeners for listening to me. And I hope that only some of you fell asleep, and at least that we get credit for the downloads. And let's do it again next time I have something fun to talk about.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. Absolutely.
All right, and a huge thank you to Tom again for coming onto the show. All right, let's wrap things up with a look at next week on Substack. So next week is going to be a little light for me, as I'm going out of town on a last-minute business trip. This one came up out of nowhere, and as I mentioned earlier, next week's podcast, as a result, will feature just a few segments, but it will have that interview with me to kind of keep things interesting. Not only that, but like I said, you can submit questions in the comments of this episode if you'd like. So ask me anything you want, within reason. Since I'll be out of town next week, tomorrow's power-up prompt will also last for 2 weeks instead of 1. I'll cover those stories on episode 54 of the show here, and the same goes for this week's wandering prompt. I'll have to skip our Mindful Monday checkpoint this week because of my travel, but I apologize for that. I hope you all, despite my general absence next week, have a wonderful and productive week of writing while I'm out doing literal business and stuff. So again, thank you so much for listening, my friends. And this is Bradley Ramsey, signing off. All right, let's take a look at this poll here. Wait a moment. What is this? Jameson and Sir Alistair are tied? Why is no one voting for Yeldab? Come on, don't you want revenge on the writer of this twisted tale? Vote for Yeldab, Titans be damned. It's just Bradley backwards, he's not clever. Ugh, I need some tea. Hey, Fenton, you want some protein tea? No, Arnold, I'm good, thank you.